Hello and welcome to something I'm very excited to announce. For the past 2 years, I've been learning Unreal Engine 5 and creating my own cooperative movement-based multiplayer FPS from scratch, while also working on Rocket League maps. But this didn't start as an FPS, so before I announce the project I'm actively working on, we're going to go back in time to 2021 when I started to work on a project I called Project Servo. Project Servo was initially going to be a multiplayer survival game where you play as a robot that you could customize. The customization would be that you could swap out different parts, and an example of that is rather than having wheels, you can float, allowing you to travel faster. Things like that. And the parts would help you survive and traverse different environments, and instead of dealing with oxygen or hunger like other survival games, you would deal with battery power and rust. I even created an extensive spreadsheet of all the different types of damage and items to counter that damage. Sounds cool, right? That's what I thought, until I really thought about it, and creating something like this didn't sound very fun to me. So eventually this idea was scrapped. I took the robot idea and modified it from a survival into a movement-based FPS with wall running, sliding, double jumps, etc. And it was really fun. The only issue with this, I was not very motivated to work on it, and the character was really bad. Like, really bad. But I went on and created a few different types of enemies and a bunch of different weapons. But making the character was difficult, and modeling and texturing sci-fi was very time consuming. And as a one-person project, I wanted something that could be done quicker and with more quality. The simple answer is low poly, but I'm not a fan of the low poly art style, so I took a break from Project Servo, went back to Rocket League modding exclusively for a while, and tried to think of something that would be fun to make and play. And that brings us to the current project I've been working on. I present to you Project Stickman. Project Stickman is a cooperative multiplayer movement-based first-person shooter where you play as Stickman. You're probably wondering, why is Stickman? The answer is difficult, but here's what my thought process was. I can't draw. I've never been able to draw. But something I did in school was comics called The Adventures of Fred, and I tried to find my book on them, but I couldn't find them. And yes, there's a book of The Adventures of Fred. The idea of The Adventures of Fred was that there were 3 horizontal boxes, and from top to bottom, they tell some dumb story, if you could even call it a story. But that same idea of not being able to draw applies here, where I can't 3D draw like a professional can. So I modeled a Stickman, which turned out pretty good. And I also did a first animation test. This video is from a year ago, and even though they're T-posing, this was actually fun to do. I tested some other models and instantly began enjoying the project much more than I ever did during Project Servo. So I restructured the entire game and art style around cartoons and customization. Players are going to be able to texture their own Stickman and hopefully change all the colors and the names of all the weapons. But first, let me talk about my favorite part. The movement. My favorite shooters are those that allow you to move quickly, have a variety of movement options, and incorporate the idea of never standing still. In most games, you can't stand still, but some are much more strict than others. That's why I decided to create a movement system that I would personally enjoy to move quickly and, most importantly, smoothly. The most important part of starting the movement system is that it couldn't be janky. It had to feel smooth for clients and the host. The movement system includes a sprint with a really awkward animation, which is going to change soon, sliding, which gains speed down hills. You can also do jump, slide, B-hops. And there's also wall running, which maintains your movement speed unlike some other games. In other games, the wall running caps your speed at a certain value. Not in this. To demonstrate this, I have a giant hill with a wall. And you can see that going down, we gain a tremendous amount of speed before leaping to the wall. While we're on the wall, we maintain the speed we had. Then some of that speed is killed going up the hill, but not much, so we go flying. There's also a grappling hook. The grappling hook works differently than in other games. Instead of launching you to the target instantly, it works more like a rubber band. You can see it well here. We latch onto the surface and it slowly stops our momentum, then slingshots us in the other direction. There's also this cloud ability system, which is going to be reworked entirely. The idea of the cloud ability system was that you could have different abilities like a dash and super jump, but it's going to be completely reimagined. And now that we've talked about the movement, it's time to talk about the enemies. Let me introduce you to the Erasers, the mortal enemy of the Stickman. There are 6 of them as of now, with more on the way. Nothing you see is final, so keep that in mind as well. First is the Pencil Eraser, which is a melee unit that walks up to you and does a pokey poke. For taking these down, we have an AK. There are a lot more weapons I created, which I'm going to be completely redoing to fit the theme of the game better. If you have suggestions for weapons you want to see, leave them below and I'll see what I can do. But once we fire on an eraser, we get a target indicator. This indicator is the crit point. If we shoot it, we do more damage, and then they are eventually defeated. The second is the Plunger Eraser, which fires homing plungers at us. The plunger can be shot, but the enemy is one of the more dangerous ones. Next is the Bow Eraser. It's the the equivalent of a sniper in other games, but instead this guy rocks a bow and arrow. The next thing I want to talk about is the enemy health system. They can't regenerate, but they do have an option to turn different types of metal. They can either be bronze, silver, or gold, which corresponds to the amount of health they have. This brings me to the next eraser. The paintbrush eraser targets other erasers, and when it finds one, it takes a second before it gives them full health and a metal coating. The cover on the eraser is also non-damageable, so you have to be more accurate with your shots. Then we have the umbrella eraser. This guy has a shield. The enemies can penetrate, but the player can't. In order to get rid of him, you need to get in really close. Next is the doofer. The doofer simply has a minigun. It keeps shooting the minigun until you're out of range, dead, or it's dead. Next, I should talk about the abilities. There are two different kinds of abilities, throwables and holdables. The throwables include dynamite and the fire bucket. The dynamite does a lot of damage and also sends you flying. The fire bucket lights everything it touches on fire and does insane damage. Those are the two throwables for now. The two holdables right now are the boxing glove and the mallet. The boxing glove can send you flying and also does damage to any enemy it touches. The mallet sends you to the ground and does damage to everything it slams. I have more ideas for abilities that I have simply not created yet, but those will be included in a future video. And that brings you to the current day, where I'm actually working on this project and beginning to finalize everything so far. If you have suggestions for anything, movement types, weapons, enemies, throwables, holdables, or even levels, let me know and I'll see what I can do. The goal is to make as many suggestions as I can in this game, so if you have a suggestion, I'll try my best to make it happen. And now that you know about the project, I can finally start posting quality updates and bugs I think are funny on Twitter. There's one I posted at the time of this video, so if you want to see that video and more in the future, go follow me on Twitter, where I plan to post a lot of updates and possibly stream the modeling and texturing process of some suggestions. I'll also post some old clips from Project Servo so you can see some of the good that came from that project. In the coming month or two, I'll be recreating the weapons or creating more abilities, so stay tuned for that. With all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.